Is it possible that you've explored this place without even realizing it, or simply by mistake? To some people, it may seem insignificant, but it isn't at all. Join us as we discover what Null Island really is. And stay until the end. We've got something new to share with you. Lines of latitude and longitude cover the entire planet, even though we can't actually see them. Even so, there's a major difference between the two. Lines of latitude are based on astronomical reality. The equator, for example, divides the Earth into two halves, while the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn mark the boundaries of the tropical zones. The location of the lines of longitude, on the other hand, is completely arbitrary. The city of Lima lies on the 77th meridian west, but there's no natural phenomenon that determines that. It simply comes from an agreement. When it was decided in the 19th century that the Prime Meridian would pass through the Greenwich Observatory, all the other meridians were established as well. That arbitrary decision ended up creating consequences that were impossible to foresee at the time, and that still affect us today. One example is Null Island, located where the equator intersects the prime meridian. It's essentially the center of the coordinate grid if you look at a world map. If a different reference point had been chosen, the intersection of 0 degrees latitude and 0 degrees longitude could have been in Kenya, Indonesia, Colombia, or anywhere else the equator passes through. But that's just a hypothetical. The point 0, 0 is located right here. Is it actually an island? You could say no. It's in international waters, where the ocean floor is nearly 5,000 meters deep, about 600 kilometers off the coast of Africa. And yet, in a way, it is an island. In fact, thousands of photos and even accommodations appear to be located there. More importantly, it has consequences for our everyday lives. Back in the Atlantic Ocean, the name Null Island has been used for this point on the map for less than 2 decades. We looked into where the idea came from, and the earliest reference we found dates back to 2008. That year, the term Null Island began to be used among data visualization specialists. They noticed that when searching for places or addresses in online mapping services, errors could sometimes occur. These might be programming errors, for example, or the result of invalid coordinates being entered. In some cases, when this happened, certain programs replaced the invalid value with 0. So if both the latitude and longitude were changed to 0, the location returned would be this exact point in the Gulf of Guinea. At that point, everything related to Null Island started out as little more than a joke. A website was even created for it. According to that site, Null Island has a population of about 4,000 people, has its own flag, and even looks like this from the air. In reality, it's completely made up. That island is actually called Tuja, and it's part of New Zealand. So is everything about Null Island just a joke? Well, maybe it started that way, but a few years later, the idea became much more serious. That's because Natural Earth, a public domain cartographic dataset, actually included it in its maps. Since it's centered at 0 degrees latitude and 0 degrees longitude, it's useful for detecting geocoding errors. It's a fictional island with an area of just 1 square meter. Because it's so small, it never actually appears on maps. It's as if it exists virtually, serving as a marker for mapping errors, even though no land is ever shown because it's too small to display. But what do these errors actually mean? Is it just a simple mistake that sends a search to Null Island? Not quite. The consequences can be surprisingly diverse. A group of researchers counted more than 300,000 Flickr photos that were geotagged to Null Island. The same happened with social media posts that included location data. There were even accommodations listed there, in the middle of the ocean. At one point, the reported origin of certain cyber attacks was also traced to that location. Another striking example occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. At the time, Johns Hopkins University was tracking confirmed COVID-19 cases in real time. However, some cases didn't have an exact location for various reasons. As a result, maps like this showed numerous cases appearing on Null Island, even though, of course, none of them had actually happened there. Perhaps the best illustration comes from this tweet. I thought I was flying from New Orleans, but it looks like I took a flight from Null Island to Los Angeles Airport. Obviously, there are no airports, restaurants, or hotels on Null Island. There's nothing there but water. Or is there something more? A few years ago, this buoy was installed exactly at the intersection of 0 degrees latitude and 0 degrees longitude. It was part of a system known by the acronym PARADA, which can be translated as the Prediction and Research Moored Array in the tropical Atlantic. The PARADA system stands for the Prediction and Research Moored Array in the tropical Atlantic. It's a joint project between Brazil, France, and the United States that monitors conditions across the tropical Atlantic Ocean. Each buoy measures wind speed and direction, air temperature, rainfall, humidity, solar radiation, atmospheric pressure, as well as water temperature and conductivity down to 500 meters below sea level. However, the buoy located at 0 degrees latitude and 0 degrees longitude stopped operating in 2021. So, if we could somehow reach Null Island, we wouldn't find any land. In fact, there wouldn't even be a buoy marking the exact location anymore. Even so, that hasn't discouraged a few adventurous travelers. Yes, some people have actually tried to visit the site just to see what they would find, and in particular, to get their GPS as close as possible to 0 degrees. 0 degrees. It's not a place that regular ships normally pass through, since it's far from the coast and outside the world's busiest shipping routes. Still, a few cruise ships have sailed close to the location. Throughout this journey exploring Null Island, there was one idea we couldn't ignore. If there's a Null Island, even if it's imaginary, could there also be an anti-Null Island? That part, in fact, is our own invention. It's also located on the Equator, but on the exact opposite side of the globe. Specifically, it's at 0 degrees latitude, 180 degrees longitude, the antipode of Null Island. The two places have several things in common. There's no land there either, only open ocean. It's also located in international waters. The area lies near the exclusive economic zones of Kiribati and the United States, thanks to the uninhabited islands of Baker and Howland. So far, we haven't found any travelers who have tried to visit the opposite side of Null Island. But if you had to choose, would you travel to 0 degrees, 0 degrees in the middle of the Atlantic, or would you rather head into the vast Pacific to 0 degrees, 180 degrees? There's one more strange thing about these 2 points. Even though they are among the most famous coordinates on Earth, almost nobody has ever actually stood on either of them. Unlike the Equator crossing in Ecuador or the Prime Meridian in Greenwich, there are no monuments, no signs, and no tourists taking selfies here. Just endless ocean stretching to every horizon. If your GPS suddenly showed 0 degrees latitude and 0 degrees longitude, most people would think their phone was broken. But in reality, it would be pointing to one of the most unusual places on the planet. And if one day someone decided to build the world's most remote artificial island exactly at that location, it would instantly become one of the strangest tourist destinations on Earth. So here's the real question. If you could place a single landmark anywhere on Earth, would you choose the center of the world's coordinate system at 0 degrees, 0 degrees, or its opposite point at 0 degrees, 180 degrees? Which one deserves to become humanity's most iconic location? Let us know in the comments below. See you next time.